In medieval Brittany, storage was not about comfort or display, it was about survival. Homes were dark, damp, and cramped, with uneven stone walls and dirt floors that never fully dried. A wooden shelf, no matter how simple, demanded space, straight walls, and precious timber. A hook did not. Driven into a beam or wedged between stones, it lifted food, tools, and daily necessities out of moisture and reach of vermin. Over time, these small iron or wooden hooks quietly reshaped the Breton household. They became memory markers, workflow guides, and silent organizers of daily life. In a land where every object had to earn its place, the hook proved more useful than any shelf ever could. In medieval Brittany, most rural homes were not designed with storage in mind. Peasant houses were small, often consisting of a single main room where cooking, eating, working, and sleeping all took place. Thick stone walls helped keep out wind and rain, but they were uneven, curved, and poorly suited for mounting flat furniture. Windows were tiny or absent, making interiors dim even during the day. Every object placed on the floor reduced already limited movement space. Because of this, horizontal storage quickly became a problem. Shelves required wall space that was straight, dry, and reachable. In reality, walls were damp, smoke-stained, and interrupted by beams or niches. Floors, often made of packed earth, were cold and wet for much of the year. Anything left low risked mold, rot, or contamination. Vertical space, however, was underused and safer. Beams supporting the roof ran overhead, remaining dry even when walls wept with moisture. Hanging objects allowed households to store tools, cookware, and food without sacrificing precious floor area. A hook driven into a beam instantly created storage where none existed before. In this environment, the usefulness of hooks was obvious. They adapted to irregular architecture and made use of space that shelves could not. Storage followed the structure of the house rather than forcing the house to change. A practical response to cramped and dark living conditions, building a shelf in medieval Brittany was not a trivial task. Shelves required straight planks, proper cutting, and some form of joinery to hold weight safely. Wood, however, was a valuable resource. Much of it was reserved for fuel, agricultural tools, carts, and repairs. Using good timber for interior furniture was often a luxury that poorer households could not afford. Even when wood was available, constructing shelves demanded time and skill. The wall had to support the weight, fastenings had to hold in stone or timber, and the shelf needed to stay level. In damp coastal climates like Brittany, wooden shelves warped easily and could rot where they touched moist walls. A poorly built shelf could collapse, breaking valuable pots or spilling food. Hooks avoided all of these problems. A simple iron hook, or even a carved wooden peg, required minimal material and almost no carpentry. It could be installed quickly, moved when needed, and replaced with little effort. One hook did the job of holding a pot, a basket, or a bundle without requiring a flat surface or heavy supports. For households focused on efficiency, hooks offered the greatest return for the smallest investment. They saved material, labor, and risk, making them far more practical than shelves in everyday Breton life. Medieval Breton houses were built around their structural elements. Thick beams carried the weight of the roof. Wooden posts divided interior space, and stone arches framed hearths and doorways. These features were not decorative, they were essential, solid, and already capable of bearing weight. Simple hooks fit naturally into this architecture, without requiring any modification to the house itself. Driving a hook into a beam or post was easy and logical. The wood was dry, strong, and accessible. Unlike walls, beams did not crumble or absorb moisture, and they were placed exactly where daily activity occurred. Pots could hang near the hearth, tools beside work areas, and baskets above pathways without obstructing movement. Shelves, by contrast, ignored the logic of the building. They demanded flat surfaces where none existed, and forced storage into fixed positions. Hooks followed the house's rhythm instead. They aligned with existing structures and respected the flow of movement inside the room. Over time, the placement of hooks reflected how the house was lived in. Objects were hung where hands naturally reached, where work paused, or where warmth and smoke offered protection. Storage was guided by architecture, not imposed upon it. In this way, hooks became an extension of the building itself, quietly cooperating with beams and posts that had already shaped Breton domestic life. Moisture was a constant enemy in medieval Brittany. Rain, coastal air, and poor drainage meant that floors were often damp. Food placed low could spoil quickly. Tools could rust, and fabrics absorbed odors and mold. Elevation was not a convenience, it was a defense. Hanging objects kept them away from wet ground. Pots dried faster after use. Baskets stayed lighter, and stored food benefited from better air circulation. Smoke from the hearth rose naturally, helping dry items suspended above it. This simple vertical separation extended the life of everyday possessions. Rodents were another persistent threat. Mice and rats easily crossed floors, but struggled to reach items hanging freely from hooks, especially when suspended away from walls. A basket lifted even slightly could mean the difference between preserved food and loss. Shelves did little to solve these problems. Mounted low, they remained accessible to pests. Mounted high, they were still attached to damp walls and difficult to clean. Hooks offered flexibility. Height could be adjusted. Items could sway out of reach, and nothing rested against moisture-absorbing surfaces. In a region where survival depended on preserving limited supplies, hanging was one of the simplest and most effective protective strategies available. One of the greatest strengths of simple hooks in medieval Brittany was their adaptability. A hook, by contrast, accepted almost anything with a handle, loop, or cloth wrapping. Cooking pots, ladles, baskets, fishing nets, rope coils, and bundles of dried herbs could all share the same hanging space at different times of day. Households did not own many specialized containers. Objects changed roles constantly. A basket used for gathering might later hold firewood, then store food overnight. Hooks allowed these items to be hung temporarily without rearranging the room. This flexibility was especially valuable in single-room homes. During cooking, utensils clustered near the hearth. During work, tools moved closer to the center of the room. At night, hanging items cleared space for sleeping. Hooks made the interior responsive rather than rigid. Shelves encouraged accumulation and fixed placement. Hooks encouraged circulation. Items were taken down, used, and returned repeatedly, keeping them visible and accessible. Nothing was hidden behind other objects or forgotten at the back of a shelf. In this system, storage was not static, it was dynamic, adjusting to seasons, tasks, and people. The hook did not dictate order, it supported it. This quiet flexibility made hooks far more useful than shelves in a household where every object had to serve multiple purposes. Medieval Breton homes were not permanent in the modern sense. Interiors changed with seasons, family size, and work demands. Furniture was sparse, and anything fixed too firmly risked becoming an obstacle. Hooks matched this need for mobility. Installing a hook required minimal effort. It could be driven into wood or wedged into stone cracks, then removed without damage. If a household needed more space, hooks could be relocated in minutes. No dismantling, no heavy lifting, no wasted material. Shelves were different. Once built, they anchored space and limited movement. Removing them meant leaving holes or damaging walls. In small rooms, this rigidity mattered. Hooks allowed households to adapt quickly to changing routines, such as winter, indoor work, or seasonal food storage. Mobility also mattered when families moved or repaired homes. Hooks could be taken along, reused, or replaced cheaply. They belonged to the people, not the building. This ease of movement reflected a broader medieval mindset. Domestic space was flexible, not fixed. Tools and storage followed life, not the other way around. In such an environment, hooks were ideal. They responded instantly to change, reinforcing their everyday usefulness over more permanent shelving. In medieval Brittany, daily life followed repetitive physical routines rather than written schedules. Cooking, cleaning, repairing tools, and preparing food happened in predictable sequences, shaped by daylight, weather, and labor. Hooks naturally aligned with these rhythms because they placed objects exactly where hands needed them without conscious searching. Frequently used tools hung at arm's reach near the hearth or work area. A pot used every morning stayed low and accessible, while seasonal items were hung higher. This created an intuitive system in which the body remembered where things belonged. People reached automatically, often without looking, guided by habit rather than thought. Shelves disrupted this flow. Items stacked on them required rearranging, lifting, or searching behind other objects. In dim interiors, this slowed work and caused accidents. Hooks kept objects separated, visible, and easy to grasp, even in low light or smoky air. Work followed movement, not storage rules. As tasks shifted during the day, items were rehung closer to where they were needed. Storage adjusted to action rather than forcing action to adapt to storage. This reduced wasted effort and saved time in physically demanding lives. Over generations, this arrangement became second nature. Children learned where things hung by watching adults, absorbing spatial habits rather than verbal instructions. Hooks became silent organizers of daily routine, shaping how people moved, worked, and rested within the same small space. Unlike furniture that signaled wealth or status, hooks carried little social meaning. They appeared in poor cottages and modest homes alike, differing only in material. Some were carved from wood, others forged from iron, but their function remained the same. What mattered was use, not appearance. Shelves, by contrast, could signal surplus. Well-built shelving suggested spare timber, craftsmanship, and a desire for display. In many Breton households, such distinctions were unnecessary or impractical. Survival, not status, defined domestic choices. Hooks were democratic tools. They served everyone equally and performed the same task regardless of who owned them. A fisherman, a farmer, or a widow all relied on hooks to manage limited space and protect belongings. This shared practice reduced visible differences inside homes. Because hooks blended into daily life, they rarely attracted attention. They were not inherited, decorated, or discussed. Yet their presence shaped interiors more profoundly than costly furniture ever did. In this way, hooks reflected a culture where function outweighed display. They reveal a society focused on practicality and resilience rather than hierarchy, where the simplest solutions endured because they worked for everyone. Over time, the use of hooks in medieval Breton homes became deeply embedded in spatial memory. Each hook was associated with a specific object and purpose. A pot always hung in the same place. A tool returned to the same beam after every use. This consistency allowed people to navigate their homes almost instinctively. In dim interiors filled with smoke and shadows, visual clarity was limited. Memory compensated for poor visibility. Hands moved toward familiar points on walls and beams without hesitation. Even in darkness, people knew where to reach. The house became a mental map, built through repetition rather than conscious planning. Shelves encouraged clutter and rearrangement, which disrupted this memory. Items stacked or shifted lost their fixed position. Hooks, however, preserved order through separation. Each object occupied its own vertical place, reinforcing habitual movement. This system was passed down informally. Children learned where things belonged by watching daily routines. No explanations were needed. The placement of hooks taught behavior silently. Over years, the house itself trained its inhabitants. Such spatial memory reduced effort and error. It saved time, prevented accidents, and supported efficiency in physically demanding lives. Hooks were not just storage tools, they were anchors for habit. They connected objects, movement, and memory into a single practical system that shaped how medieval Breton households functioned every day. Simple hooks were never symbols of poverty or backwardness. In medieval Brittany, they represented thoughtful adaptation to a challenging environment. Damp air, limited space, scarce materials, and constant use demanded solutions that were efficient, flexible, and reliable. Hooks met all of these needs quietly and effectively. They saved space without requiring construction. They protected food and tools from moisture and pests. They adjusted easily to daily routines and seasonal changes. Most importantly, they worked with the body and the building rather than against them. Shelves, while useful in other contexts, imposed rigidity in a world that needed adaptability. Hooks embraced impermanence and movement. They allowed households to respond to life as it unfolded, not as it was planned. This preference reveals something deeper about medieval Breton life. Survival was not about accumulation or display, but about balance. Objects earned their place through use. Space was shaped by necessity. The simplest solutions endured because they respected reality. In the end, what mattered was not what could be stored neatly, but what could be reached easily, dried quickly, and remembered instinctively. In that quiet logic, a single hook often proved more valuable than an entire shelf.